this is part 3 of the chapter 1 lecture notes. I wanted to show you something that I won't, I'm not going to show you. You'll have to go back and look at it on your own. But this is slide number 17, and the one following is slide number 18. So if you would like to watch the little video clips, this particular video clip, you see, actually, hold on. Yeah, for this link, if you click on it, you will see someone touch the mimosa leaves, and they close up when a person touches them in just the right way. So it's just a short video clip, but it's pretty cool to watch. But I can't play them when I'm recording the lectures. So I just want to make you aware. It's slide 17, and then there's another short video clip on slide 18. But anyway, back to the characteristics that living things share. Um, this, of course, is showing an example of a living organism responding to stimuli. Um, a mimosa tree is one of those trees that produces you see them around in this area, but they produce those big pink flowers that they're beautiful and they smell really really good, and then they turn brown and fall in the yard and make a big mess. But they're really pretty when they bloom. Um, but the mimosa leaves, when you touch them, they actually will close up in response to touch. So that's a example of a living thing responding to stimuli. And then here's a sunflower, and the sunflower will the stalk will actually grow toward the sunlight. Um, and this is a little video. Also, this is slide 18 that you can go back to the slides and click on the actual chapter 1 slides on the Moodle page, and you can go to slide 17 and slide 18 and watch those little video clips. Okay, I know I've said that enough times now. So another thing that living things have in common is homeostasis. So I don't care if it is the smallest living thing, which is a bacterium. Um, every every living thing maintains certain conditions inside its cells. And if it's something like a multicellular organism like a human or a frog or a horse, um, within the cells and also within the organ systems, the organism is able to maintain certain internal conditions within a narrow range. So examples of this are body temperature. We know that body temperature, the average is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, um, and I think that's somewhere around 37 degrees Celsius. But if you take your temperature, it's okay if it's a little bit below that or a little bit above that. It's only when it gets to be like 102 or 103 that you get real concerned, um, that you're running a fever. So blood glucose levels. My daughter, I may as well go ahead and tell you because I'll probably use her as an example sometimes, but I have a daughter named Grace, and she's 13, and she has had type 1 diabetes since she was 2 years old. And so we're really concerned about blood glucose levels at our house. And we try to keep her blood glucose levels between 70 units, and we try to keep it between 70 and 150. And 150 is actually high for a normal a person without diabetes, but it's we're happy with it, when it's someone who has diabetes. So we can live with this range. But for a normal healthy person without diabetes, the normal range I think is from like 80 to 110 or 120. Um, and it varies at different times of day. You want your fasting blood sugar when you wake up in the morning to be below 100, but after, during the day it can go up to 120 and it's okay. Um, but anyway, breathing rate, heart rate, blood pressure. These are all conditions that organisms need to maintain within a narrow range. Um, and there's many other examples. So homeostasis is just maintaining these stable conditions. Um, we, when we were looking at the slide of the toad, in talking about how living things are organized, they have a certain order. Well, this is a list of that order. Um, living things are organized at the level of atoms, and atoms are the smallest particles of elements. So living things contain a lot of carbon atoms, hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Those are the sulfur. These are the main primary atoms, and then of course there are others. But these are the most common six atoms that are found in living things. And then those atoms are arranged to form molecules. And an example of a molecule, speaking of glucose, this is the chemical formula for a molecule of glucose, C6H12O6. That is 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. So molecules are combinations of atoms. And then macromolecules, this glucose is usually in a shape that forms a hexagon, which is just a six-sided figure. But when glucose forms long chains of glucose in plants are called starch. And in animal cells is called glycogen. We will talk a lot more about this in chapter 3, but those are macromolecules. And macromolecule has become a very popular term in the diet world, the world of nutrition and dieting, getting your macros, and that means your fat, your protein, your fiber, and your carbohydrates. So macromolecules are just large molecules. And then those macromolecules combine to form, they're called organelles because they're like little organs. They're tiny little structures within cells, such as the nucleus of a cell. That perform various functions. The nucleus contains the DNA and it's like the control center of the cell. It controls what the cell does and all the activities of the cell. So organelles group together and they're enclosed within a membrane and they form cells. Um, Similar cells combine to form tissues. We have lots of different tissue types in our bodies. We have connective tissues and epithelial tissues and muscle tissue, nervous tissue. Um, and tissues combine together to form organs and organ systems. And then we can group individual organisms into populations and communities. So a population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area. And a community is all the living things that live in that habitat. So all the populations. And then ecosystems contain the community plus the habitat. And then the biosphere is the entire area on the entire earth where living things can exist. So that includes in the air, in the water, in the soil. And here is a chart that kind of shows you a diagram here that shows you the levels of organization. So it doesn't have atoms and molecules and macromolecules. It starts with organelles. Here is showing you a picture of these little cells that contain the nucleus. In these cells, the nucleus is dyed blue. So you see it here and you see it here. I'm coloring them red now. But all these little structures are the nucleus of the cell. That's an organelle. And then you have organelles combine together, and they're surrounded by a membrane, a plasma membrane, to form a cell. And these are examples of human red blood cells. Cells combine to form tissues. This is an example of a microscopic image of skin tissue. This top layer is a cross section through the skin. So this top layer is called the epidermis, and below that is the dermis and the hypodermis. And then tissues can combine to form organs and organ systems. And here we see the digestive system, which contains organs like the stomach and the intestine, and accessory organs like the liver and the pancreas and the gallbladder. And then all the organ systems together form the organism, as long as it's a multicellular organism. Now, if it's a single-celled organism, it only goes up to the level of a cell. So if it's unicellular, it stops at the level of a cell. Organisms of the same species living together in a population, or in the same habitat, are a population. And then all the living things are the community. So the community in this particular habitat would be the trees and the birds and the squirrels, all the living things, the mushrooms, all the living things in this habitat. And then the ecosystem would be the living things plus the non-living things like water and soil. And the biosphere is the entire area on Earth where living things can exist. Here's a few definitions for you. Speaking of single-celled organisms, there are two different types of cells. They're either prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. A prokaryotic cell does not have a nucleus. It lacks a nucleus, and it lacks membrane-bound organelles. The main thing is just remember for now that it does not have a nucleus. And any organism that is composed of prokaryotic cells is unicellular. All prokaryotes are unicellular. So that means it's just a single-celled organism, like bacteria. A eukaryote is a cell that does have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So the big difference is prokaryotic cells lack a nucleus, and they're always single-celled. And eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus, and you can find eukaryotic cells in multicellular organisms like plants and animals. Here's your definition for population: members of the same species that live in a habitat together. And we know that they're members of the same species when they can mate and produce fertile offspring. So that's the test. If they're able to mate and produce fertile offspring, they are members of the same species. Now, some of you may be thinking that some exceptions to that, and there are some. We have been able to create some hybrids from two different species. They were able to mate and produce a liger. You can look that up, Google it if you want to. It's a mating between a tiger and a lion, and they have been able to, the liger has been able to reproduce. That's my understanding anyway. So that doesn't mean a tiger and a lion are the same species. So there are some exceptions to that. But mostly, if they're the same species, they can mate and produce fertile offspring, and that's how you know. And then the community is all the living things, all the populations within an ecosystem. This slide has a little bit of information on the diversity of life. We know that there's tremendous diversity of life on Earth, different types of species of organisms. And the source of this diversity is evolution. The definition of evolution is the process of gradual change during which new species arise from older species. It's important for you to remember that evolution does not mean a single organism changes. It's just that the new species over time has different characteristics than the old population had. And here is a